If you've been around this week and with your ears and eyes open, I'm sure that you know that this country has had lottery fever, right? It hit the fever pitch kind of on Tuesday when the Mega Millions jackpot, somebody actually won it. I'm not going to ask how many of you drove out of state to Tennessee to buy one of these tickets or multiple tickets. I'm guessing probably there's some. But the thought, I mean, it's intoxicating, the thought of winning that kind of money, right? I asked Jenny earlier this week, I said, what would you do if we won that kind of money? And she said, well, I'd probably add on to our house or put some money away for, some for college or a vehicle. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, I would buy a new house. Right? I mean, I'm buying new vehicles. I'll buy the college if I have to, right? I mean, what? So, that's a lot of money, isn't it? And, in my mind, I'm thinking, I could manage it in a God-honoring way, right? Lord, just give me the chance, right? No, I could, but I don't know, man. It'd be tough. It'd be tough. Now, personally, I don't play lottery for a couple of reasons, but one of the big reasons is that the odds of winning are just crazy, right? I mean, they're astronomical. Nearly you had the odds of winning that $1.6 billion last Tuesday night were 1 in 320 million. Now, that probably doesn't mean a lot to us, but this is to kind of put it in perspective. You're 35 times more likely to be murdered in the Grand Canyon than to win that money, right? You are 65,000 more times likely to suffocate in bed accidentally on your own than to win that. 65,000, right? That sheet, Ladies, you are 5 times more likely to have quintuplets naturally than to win all that money, right? Can you imagine you go to the doctor like, yeah, you're pregnant. You got 5 in there, right? I mean, you're 5 times more likely for that to happen. The odds aren't in our favor, but we're like, somebody's going to win, right? So maybe it's just you. And so we just think, man, maybe that could be me. And there's legitimate reasons probably why most of us could use that money. I mean, it would be nice to put kids through college or maybe purchase reliable transportation or more room for your family. But the danger is our desire for stuff, right? I mean, the temptation for most of us would be to fill up our shopping cart day after day after day after day with one shiny toy after another. And the central focus of our life, again, this would be really a hard temptation, would be to depend rather on God than depend on stuff. Just make more and more money and buy more and more things. But you don't have to win the lottery to have that attitude, right? In fact, this is a very common attitude that Jesus warns us about regularly. In fact, Jesus talks, and you've heard this, I mean, he talks more about money than he does almost anything, right? And so from time to time, I think it's important for us to talk about it as well. I'm starting a new series today, and I'm just putting it from here to there, and that's kind of literally what's going to happen over these next 4 or 5 weeks. We're just kind of going to go from here to there. There's really no centralized text we're going to be focusing on. We're just going to be bouncing around today. But today, we're going to talk about money a little bit in Luke chapter 12. And so if you got your Bible, go ahead and flip there with me. And in that text where Jesus, he tells a story about a man who's really, really well off. And I don't think he hit the lottery, but he's definitely got plenty of money to go around. And so today, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to see why Jesus talks to us so much about the pitfalls of money. Luke chapter 12, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to him, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Now, inherently, we know this, right? I mean, we know that greed and living for stuff doesn't bring about joy. In fact, oftentimes it brings about more heartache if we're being really honest. And yet, day after day, we're told that the meaning of life and the meaning to happiness and joy is getting more stuff, having more stuff. Right? And so knowing that this would be our attitude, Jesus tells a story. He tells a parable. It says he told him a parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. There I'll store all my grains and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you got plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. Now, we read a story like this, or we hear this parable that Jesus tells, and we say, yeah, this guy was foolish. I mean, and we would be right. I mean, this guy was concerned with no one other than himself. Everything in life seemed to revolve around him. And we may be tempted to say, well, yeah, that's rich people problems. That doesn't apply to me, preacher, because I have a modest income. Saving too much, like this guy in this parable Jesus told, that's not my problem. Saving too little is my problem, right? But you don't have to make 6 figures or 7 figures to want a lot of stuff. In fact, oftentimes this plays the middle class or the working class economy economically the most. Listen to some of these statistics. In 2017, Career Builder reported that 78% of Americans who work full-time are living paycheck to paycheck. Average credit card debt for an individual is $6,375. American family has upwards of $16,000 household credit card debt. Average interest rate of those are 17% attached to it. 43% of those have been carrying that balance for 2 years. America now, as a nation, we have exceeded $1 trillion in credit card debt. 1 out of 100 people surveyed, I heard this in a message, ages 65 or older, 97 would not be able to write a check for $600 if they had to. In fact, according to Social Security statistics, 85 out of 100 Americans have less than $250 cash saved up by age 65. 90% of married couples who apply for a home loan in this country have 4 credit cards minimum. 3 of those 4 are maxed out. The average, they're maxed out to the limit. 82% of those have 2 car payments. The average car payment on a car now, I think, is close to $500, $479 for 68 months. And so those statistics scream this message. American people love their stuff. Amen. Right? And we'll do whatever it takes to keep acquiring it. Why is that? Well, it's because we're like this rich man. Right? We always want more. We just always want more. And I think there's at least 2 reasons. There's probably multiple reasons why we can explain this, but there's at least 2 reasons I think that we can explain this. And one is just simply this, is that we're self-centered. I mean, if we can be real honest with ourselves this morning, church, I mean, we tend to be self-centered. This man in this parable, he was obviously very successful. To begin with, Jesus says that he was rich. He was already a man of wealth. Somewhere along the way, he'd either come into a lot of money, maybe he built a company, maybe he built a business, maybe he was inherited some of it. Not sure what it was. Either way, maybe it was a combination, but for whatever way, he was doing really well financially. And then on top of that, Jesus says that his crops are producing. And so, his crops produced well, and so on top of this money he's already accumulated, he's about to bring more money in, and so he faces a decision. What am I going to do with all my excess wealth? And so what does he do? Does he thank God for the blessing? Does he ask God, how should I use this to be a blessing to you, to be a blessing to others, to bless my family, should we do something? No. He can only think of himself. In verse 18, he says, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll build bigger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you got plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. See, this guy chose grain over God. He chose selfishness over selflessness. He's just thinking about himself. His priorities are out of whack. And that attitude can be present in our lives as well. Right? And this is why Jesus is constantly talking to us about money, because it's really easy for us to have this attitude. I remember when I was 16 years old, I was in high school. That was the first time I really had a real job. Now, I had always worked. I'd always mowed grass and done a variety of different things just to try to make a little bit of money. But that summer I turned 16, I was a lifeguard. And I worked full-time all that whole summer, and I hated that job. It was so boring. Right? I just sit there and, twirl that whistle back and forth and just kind of hope somebody would drown just so I could jump in. But nobody did, hardly ever, and so it was really boring. But I remember, what it was like getting that first paycheck, right? That first time. And I didn't make, I think I was making minimum wage back then. It was like $4.25. So it's not that much, but now if you put 70 or 80 hours on it, to a 16-year-old, that's a ton of money, right? And maybe you can remember the same thing. And now, for some of you, when you first started working, minimum wage was just that quarter on that $4, something like that, maybe. Just kidding. Yeah, it's okay. But you're right, it doesn't matter. You remember what that feeling was like, right? I mean, what it was like to have all that money. And then the thought is, what am I going to do? What am I going to buy first? What am I going to use? And listen, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with buying stuff. God gives us money, at least in part, so that we'll enjoy life. I mean, Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6, he says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant or put their hope in wealth. It's uncertain. Put your hope in God. He richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Money itself isn't evil, right? I mean, just prior to that, and we could go back, and I was real tempted even just to use that text in 1 Timothy 6. But he says, money itself isn't evil. Paul says it's the root of all kinds of evil. There's nothing wrong with having stuff. The problem is when stuff has us, right? I mean, that's the issue. The problem comes when all we can think about is ourselves. And there's so many people today, even Christians, who we're just kind of consumed with our own selves, right? Just, when it comes to money. And sometimes as we get older even, we still have this same teenage mindset. What am I going to do with all this? I got this money. How am I going to spend it? What can I get for me? It's all about me. Me, me, me. I mean, how else do you explain when somebody spends more money on something like a big screen television or summer vacation or a new china cabinet, and more money goes to that one purchase than does a whole year's worth of charitable giving to the church? How else do you explain when an 18-year-old turns to mom and dad for some help for paying in college, and mom and dad has to say, oh, sorry, we can't help. But those same parents, we got a $300,000 house and 2 cars with $500 payments. Mom's got more clothes in her closet than Kohl's, and dad's got a $60,000 boat on top, back of a $50,000 truck. And again, it's this kind of this whole, bigger barn syndrome, right? It's just stuff. This is what this man in the parable had. He was blessed with so much stuff. He just thought, how can I get more? How can I accumulate more? Did you notice in this story? This guy uses I, me, my, or mine. I counted at least 11 times. For him, it was my barns, my grain, my goods, my crops. I'll do this. I'll eat. I'll drink. I'll be married. No mention of others. No mention of family. No mention of the poor. No mention. I, me, my, and myself. Right? He was completely absorbed. And ironically, the problem wasn't his possessions. His real problem was his heart. Right? Just focus on himself. And friends, if you want to find out whether or not this is a problem with you, just reflect on how and where you spend your money. Jesus said it like this in Luke 12:34. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, we know that verse, right? But just let it sink in for just a minute. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's just two sides of the same coin, right? This is why the people will say, well, the only way for me to lose weight is I've got to join a gym. And I say, well, you don't have to join a gym to lose weight. Just diet or exercise, do some stuff. And the reason is it sounds ridiculous at first, but they know, well, if I sink $40 a month into a gym membership, then I'll use it, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to use it. Because why? Because where your treasure is, there's your heart, right? And so you can apply that to a number of situations. This rich man, he had everything he wanted. He was getting more, but he had tunnel vision, right? But you know what? This guy, in this parable that Jesus told, he would be the patron saint for many Americans, right? Would love to trade positions with him. He was successful. He was important. He had a bunch of stuff. He was getting ready to eat, drink, and be merry. God said to him, "You fool, tonight you're going to die. You fool." All that junk, all that stuff that you're accumulating for yourself, that you're just absorbed in, you're going to die and somebody else is going to get it. I mean, we tend to be so self-centered so often. I think that's one of the reasons. I think there's another reason that we tend to have this bigger barn syndrome and just kind of want more and more stuff. And the second one is because we're discontent. We're discontent. It's easy to notice that this man in Jesus' story was restless. He was never satisfied. He was never content about what he had. You know, he had all sorts of things, but he said, I'm just going to build bigger barns. Right? And so many times we struggle to be content with what we have, don't we? I mean, let's be honest. And I think there's lots of reasons for that, but one of the big reasons that we struggle to be content, I think, is because we compare ourselves to other people. You ever done that? A couple of years ago, actually a couple of weeks ago when I filled in for my buddy Jonathan, the first time I went to his church in the Atlanta area, I found myself doing the little comparison game, right? And so when I went there, I'd never been there before, and I was very content, with everything that I had until I saw what he had, right? I was content with my office at church until I saw his office. He got a bathroom and a shower in his office. It was really big. I was content with my house in my neighborhood until I saw where he lived. His house had 4 bedrooms. Mine just has 3. He has a suite upstairs and 3.5 bedrooms, or bathrooms. I was content with my nice little town and our handful of restaurants until I saw his town and all the things he had to do and all the places he had to eat, right? And I'm not the only one. You've done this before, right? You visit somebody else's home. They got nicer furniture than you and more space, and you start feeling envious, right? You're no longer content with your home, even though it serves its purpose. Your best friend pulls up in a nice new car, and all of a sudden you're like, man, my car is not that great anymore, right? It's getting you where you need to go, but you're not content anymore. In one of Aesop's fables, a story is told about a man who could have anything that he wanted. Anything he wanted could be his, but the catch was everything he asked for, his neighbor would get twice as much as he did. And so the man wished for a beautiful home. But his neighbor also got a beautiful home. It was twice as big as his. Then he wished for a new horse, and he loved the horse. It was a great horse. But his neighbor got 2 horses, and they were wonderful. He wished for some new clothes. Instantly, he got a brand new wardrobe. But his neighbor's wardrobe was twice as nice. Twice as plenty. It wasn't long that this man could not enjoy his house, his horse, or his wardrobe. It was eating him up that his neighbor was getting all this stuff. It was twice as nice. It was twice as good as his. And so at the end of the story, he had this thought. The fable ends with this man wishing to be blind in one eye. See, why is that? Because in our minds, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Our friends and the people we associate with, well, they just seem happier, and their spouse is more attractive, and they've got more stuff, and their appearance is better than ours, and their cars are cleaner, and their houses are nicer, and their kids are better behaved, and their lives are more exciting. A lot of times we blame our financial problems on bad planning and bad accounting. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes we're just not very good at it, right? We need somebody to step in and help us with our money and budgeting, and sometimes that's the case. But far too often we have financial problems because we fall into this trap of comparing ourselves with others and constantly wanting more. And so money is no longer just this method that provides for ourselves and the necessities of life, but now it's a way to keep score. I got to compare myself to what my neighbors have and compare myself to what somebody else close to me has. One of the first books that really made a big impact on my finances, not that my finances are the model by any chance or any stretch, but one of the first books was The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. It's several years old now. It's pretty old. I'm sure he's written something beyond that, maybe better now. But he writes this. He says this. Keeping up with the Joneses, peer pressure, cultural expectations, reasonable standard of living. I don't care how you say it. We all want to be accepted by our crowd and our families. This need for approval and respect drives us to do some really insane things. One of the dumb things we do is to destroy our finances by buying garbage we can't afford to try to make ourselves appear well-to-do. And then he adds, when you buy a big pile of stuff with no money and lots of debt, you're a financial fake. King Solomon put it like this. If you love money and wealth, you'll never be satisfied with what you have. That's a guy who never looked at a price tag his entire life. Mike Breaux is a former pastor at Southland Christian Church in Lexington, Kentucky. This is a large mega church. He was originally from Kentucky. He told a story about a time when he and his family took a family vacation to Hilton Head in North Carolina. And somebody had loaned Mike a condo at Harbor Town in Hilton Head. Maybe you've been there, but Mike said we arrived. We felt a little bit uncomfortable being surrounded by so many well-to-do people. He said, but we were determined to have a good time. And so the first night, he said, we went to a concert, and the concert was outside. And there was about 250 people there. And a lot of the kids, the grade school kids, went down front. They were standing down front. And so their son, Derek, he said, asked, can I go up front? And so he went up front with all the kids and sat down by the stage. Bro said, now I've got to admit that Derek kind of stood out to those kids. He said the day before we left, he needed a haircut, but all the barbershops were closed. So he said, we let Grandpa cut his hair in a burr haircut. It didn't look very good. He said all the other kids there in the concert were dressed in these polo shirts, and Derek had this old tattered Milligan College t-shirt on. And he said the MC came on and said to the kids, how many of your parents drive Jaguars? And a number of them raised their hands. And he said, okay, how many of your parents drive Mercedes? And a number of the kids raised their hands. He said that his son Derek just kind of turned around and kind of laughed, looking back at Bro. And Derek, or the MC, said, all right, I need some help up here on the platform. Which of you kids would like to help me? And he said to his son Derek, just raise his hand, me. And he said, for whatever reason, this MC said, okay, yeah, you come up here. And Bro said, I just about died. He said, here's this little freckle-faced hillbilly. And so the first thing this MC said, he said, son, where are you from? And Derek said, Kentucky. And he said, hey, where'd you get that haircut? And he said, I don't know. He said, hey, where'd you get that haircut? He said, I don't know. Hey, son, what's your name? He said, Derek. Derek, where'd you get that haircut? He said, my papa cut it with the dog clippers. And Bro said, I wanted to crawl under the stage, right? This whole audience was laughing at this little hick kid from Kentucky. But he said, the next day I was on the beach. And I got to thinking about that. And he just started laughing so hard. He said, you know what? I'm so blessed. He said, I'm blessed with a healthy, funny child, a wonderful wife, a good church. He said, I wouldn't exchange my wife and kids and dog clippers and all for everybody here. And so about 3 months later, he told that story to Youth Leaders Convention in Joplin, Missouri. And after it was finished, a young wife came up to him in tears. And she said, I want to thank you for telling that story. She said, I grew up at Hilton Head, and my parents have 6 cars, but their life is so messed up. She said, they can't understand how I can possibly be married to a youth minister when our car doesn't start even half the time. But she said, but they're so lost. How foolish is it for us to think that our self-worth and our contentment has anything to do with what other people have around us. A man's life doesn't consist in the abundance of the things that he possesses. Paul writes it like this in Philippians 4. He said, I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And so we read that, we're like, oh, okay, Paul, our ears perk up. You've got the secret here. You know what it means to be content. Paul, tell us, what is it? What is it? And he goes on the next verse and he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Don't buy into the lie of this world that he who dies with the most toys wins. The winner of this world is he who dies in Christ. Amen. And not only that, but he or she who gets to enjoy a relationship with him while they live. You know, if you've been here for any period of time, we don't pressure you into giving. We don't talk to you often about, hey, you need to tithe, you need to give this amount, you need to do this. But being generous with the things that God has given us each week honors God. And it helps us to keep money in its proper perspective. Because at the end of the day, God owns it all, right? You and I, we're just temporary stewards of all of it. And of course, the example here is Jesus. Jesus gave up heaven so that you and I could have it. One of the greatest things that I've discovered in my life, and I bet you have too, if you've been following Jesus for any period of time, that life just goes so much better when I trust that God knows best for me. And everything, including my finances. I hope today that this has just been a reminder for some of you, just the decision that you made to follow Jesus. That when you make that confession of faith, that you believe that he is the Christ, the Son of the living God, you're choosing to make him your Savior and Lord. Right? Not only, God, will you forgive me my sins? That grace that we sang about earlier, we just want to just cherish our, wash in that. But we're also choosing to make him the Lord of our life, which includes even our finances. Maybe you needed a reminder of that this morning. Or maybe you're here today and you've never responded to, you've never received the life-changing message and hope of the grace of Jesus. If that's the case, we'd love to talk to you more about that today. We're going to sing in just a moment. We're just going to sing just a song, just a simple song of decision. And for you today, this may be just a simple reminder that, hey, I've decided to follow Jesus. And so wherever, God, you lead me, I'm going to follow you. And I've decided to follow Jesus in every aspect of my life. Or maybe for you today, this is a song of an invitation song to where you truly maybe want to make Christ the Lord of your life. Surrender to him. We would love to help you to do just that if you've got a decision that you would like to make. Let's be standing.